Welcome to the Ignatian Spirituality Plenary session of the Jesuit Higher Education Conference. I'm Erin, Cline, the Paul and Chandler Tagliabue Distinguished Professor of Interfaith Studies and Dialogue at Georgetown University. And for those of us who work in the field of Ignatian spirituality today, there's a sense of urgency to meet the challenges of a changing and hurting world. In my recent book, A World on Fire, Sharing the Ignatian Spiritual Exercises with Members of Other Religions, I examine how and why the exercises might be adapted, not just for non-Catholic Christians or for seekers, but for members of other faith traditions from all around the globe. As my collaborator and dear friend Kevin O'Brien points out in his book, The Ignatian Adventure, working with the exercises today involves helping people from different contexts to see how Ignatian spirituality can serve as a tool for justice, for education, and for the greater good of our brothers and sisters all over the world. We share the vision of Pedro Arrupe, who founded the Jesuit Refugee Service in 1980 while he was the Superior General of the Jesuits. Father Arrupe wanted our accompaniment of refugees to be, as he put it, human, pedagogical, and spiritual. And so it is my pleasure today to introduce the Reverend Thomas Smolich, International Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service. Headquartered in Rome with 10 regional offices around the world, the organization has more than 1,800 staff and volunteers, including 70 Jesuits, and serves upward of 950,000 refugees per year. In addition to health and social services, JRS offers formal and informal instruction, from preschool to vocational training to computer and language classes, to approximately 280 children, young people, and adults each year. While much of his Jesuit life has been in administrative capacities, including 8 years each in the Diocese of San Jose and the Archdiocese of Washington, his first assignment as a priest was at Dolores Mission Parish, just east of downtown Los Angeles, where he spent 7 years. It was mostly made up of housing projects, and issues of poverty, immigration, drug use, and gang violence were daily realities. But Father Smolich says that the parishioners there taught him how to be a priest, welcoming him with generosity and warmth. We want to welcome him today as well. After the plenary, we invite participants to log on to the live Zoom for a live Q&A with Father Smolich, and then an examine with Kathleen Moss-Weigert. And now, I'll turn it over to Father Smolich.
Greetings to you from Rome, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this 6th conference on justice in Jesuit higher education. I come to you as an insider-outsider. I was involved in Jesuit governance for 15 years until 2014, attending many of these previous conferences. Since 2015, I have been the International Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service, the Society of Jesus ministry to forcibly displaced people throughout the world. Last year, we served over 1 million people in 57 countries, or branch campuses. No surprise, education is our largest priority, from infancy to job training, from special needs children to teacher training. Acknowledging major differences between a university and JRS, we have much in common as Jesuit ministries. For example, the majority of our staff and those we serve are not Christian, and many who see themselves as Catholics are really post-Christian. The number of Jesuits in JRS is not increasing. A majority of our senior leadership team of regional directors are now lay colleagues. Many of our staff members wonder what Jesuit really means, and their passion for justice may not come through their experience of faith. Last October marked the 20th anniversary of then Superior General Father Peter Hans Kolvenbach's address at Santa Clara University that began these justice conferences. He set the tone for our continuing conversation. His profound address offered a reflection and a challenge that contextualized Jesuit universities in the broader history of the church, in society, both capital and small s, and higher education itself in the last quarter of the 20th century. As we begin the third decade of the 21st century, I would like to offer homage to Father Kolvenbach by reflecting with you on the central theme in his presentation, the section entitled American Jesuit Higher Education for Faith and Justice, and to consider what justice rooted in faith could mean for us today. There is much to celebrate and much creative work to be done. But first, a composition of place. We were supposed to have been together last year at Georgetown, and COVID may feel like an endless composition of place, reimagining herd immunity and super spreader events. But let's take a COVID break. 2 miles southeast of Georgetown, on January 6th, a group of people broke into the U.S. Capitol and put many government leaders at risk. But don't compose that event. Robert A. Pape of the University of Chicago and director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats analyzed the counties where these people came from. Controlling for relevant variables, counties that have the greatest decline in white population had an 18% chance of sending an insurrectionist to D.C., while those with the least growth had only a 3% chance. This would occur by chance less than 1 in 1,000 times. Let me quote Dr. Pape. Put another way, the people alleged by authorities to have taken the law into their hands on January 6th typically hail from places where non-white populations are growing fastest. I invite you to compose one of those places in your mind. Perhaps you already live in such a city or suburb or small town. Take a moment to imagine yourself as a long-term white resident of such a community, seeing changes from year to year. What do those changes look like? What is different about the stores in the shopping center, the children in the playground, the cooking aromas on your block? And how do you feel about these changes? There are many possible reactions to such change, but imagine that your strongest reaction is fear. What generates that fear? What does this growing fear feel like day by day, month after month? Please hold on to this composition of place as we see how Father Kolvenbach's insights have played out. In his reflections on American Jesuit higher education for faith and justice, Father Kolvenbach proposed ideal characteristics of 3 complementary dimensions of Jesuit higher education: what our students become, what our faculty do, and the way of proceeding for our universities. First, what our students become. 20 years ago, Father Kolvenbach saluted our universities for helping students engage the real world around them so that they would become adults of solidarity in the future. Solidarity comes through contact, not merely concepts. And we should be proud of the depth and the breadth we have brought to this priority and the work that our graduates do around the world. For example, after graduating from LMU, Colin Gilbert served as Director of Service Learning at Xavier High School in Palm Desert, California. He then became Country Director of JRS Jordan, transforming it into an educational and accompaniment resource for over 15,000 refugees. Now he is a founding member and Director of Partnerships and Pedagogy at Sown to Grow, an online student reflection platform empowering marginalized students through evidence-based practices, already in use at several Jesuit and Cristo Rey schools. For many years, JRS has worked with the School of Social Work at Boston College. This partnership led to a formal memorandum of collaboration between JRS and the entire university in 2019. Here in Rome, we have been blessed by interns from this program who sometimes stay on to work with us. Last year's intern, Kaylee Cannell, is coordinating our staff care program from her home in Texas. And this year's intern, Elise Michelson-Steisland, is assisting her from Connecticut. We should all be very proud of the Ignatian Solidarity Network. ISN made the transition from a once-a-year teach-in at the School of the Americas to an unparalleled engagement of Jesuit students and others in a deep commitment to faith and justice. 7 of the 8 ISN staff members are graduates of Jesuit universities, including Executive Director Chris Kerr and Networking and Development Coordinator Lena Chapin, both from John Carroll, and Jose Arnulfo Cabrera, a Xavier grad who is Director of Education and Advocacy for Migration. Much to be proud of among our students. What do faculty do? Faculty research and teaching. Father Kolvenbach stressed the need for interdisciplinary learning that engages the real world. He reminded us of the fallacy of a neutral or value-free perspective and the need to have the viewpoint of the poor always at the focus of our work. A scan of any of our school's research projects would confirm this progress. The institutional commitment to this goal is evident in the variety of programs featured in every weekly AJCU bulletin. For a few examples, the School of Environmental Sustainability at Loyola Chicago, and the Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment at Gonzaga University. The Institute of International Humanitarian Affairs at Fordham, and the Jesuit Social Research Institute of Loyola New Orleans. The multifaceted response to slavery and racism that began at Georgetown and is now active across the entire Jesuit USA world. In this category, let me also note the Mission Priority Examen that is now part of our higher education network and well deserving of praise. This collaborative process helps schools identify their own path towards strengthening their engagement with the world consistent with our Jesuit heritage. Again, much to be proud of. Our way of proceeding. Our way of proceeding is shorthand for the attitudes, values, and behaviors that came from St. Ignatius and his first companions, which continue to animate the Jesuit or Ignatian perspective today. Father Kolvenbach noted that the character of our universities, our contemporary way of proceeding, that is, how we support these dynamisms internally and how they impact society, is more difficult to identify than successful students and faculty research. Several times in his presentation, he refers to the diaconia fidei, Greek for the service of faith, and the promotion of justice as the primary characteristic of what we do as Jesuit educators. Diaconia fidei, the service of faith. That's the hard part, isn't it? Ignatian spirituality is our way of proceeding towards this greater reality of co-laboring with Jesus Christ. But Ignatian spirituality doesn't necessarily get us to the hard questions of belief and non-belief, of organized religion, of the Catholicity of our project that faith requires. Notwithstanding jokes about whether or not Jesuits are really part of the Catholic Church, we are, and our schools are. Father Kolvenbach focused on the attributes of Jesuit education built on the service of faith. But that connection has become more tenuous 2 decades later, and we all have doubts about how much of our efforts around justice are expressions of the service of faith in general, or Ignatian spirituality in particular. In the rest of this presentation, then, let me focus on what the service of faith might mean in 2021. Allow me to present the urgency of the task before us, a paradigm shift, and a way of proceeding. The urgency of the task. 10 years after the Santa Clara Conference, at the 2010 Higher Education Networking Conference in Mexico City, Father General Adolfo Nicolas said that Jesuit learned ministry must deal with the 2 isms that globalization has spread. And I quote, "A dominant world culture marked by an aggressive secularism that claims that faith has nothing to say to the world and its great problems, and which often claims that religion is in fact one of the world's great problems. And the resurgence of various fundamentalisms, often fearful or angry reactions to postmodern world culture, which escape complexity by taking refuge in a certain faith divorced from or unregulated by human reason." What does faith mean in this era of secularism and fundamentalism? This challenge is where the Catholic Church should be, and it is not. The Catholic Church in the USA is in tatters. The gospel is not in tatters, and there are amazing women and men doing phenomenal work in and on behalf of the Catholic Church. The Church has had crises before and will have others. However, this is our crisis, and the Church in its current form is not a credible body in our educated and interconnected world. Some of this comes from declining engagement in organized religion worldwide. Some of it is the inevitable time it takes to adopt the changes of a significant council like Vatican II. but it's really about the sexual abuse crisis. I say that knowing that the church has made real strides. Our children are safer than ever in church activities. So better put, the sexual abuse crisis is the inability of church leaders to clearly own up to what happened and to convincingly and transparently make the changes needed so that the lack of accountability doesn't happen again. Much of the abuse news these days is historical, and some of that history is horrifying. But it is the repetition, the drip of old news, the bad decisions made in pastoral care and supervision, both present and past, and the politicization of church leadership, which intentionally or not deflects attention from the need for repentance and responsibility. That is debilitating and lethal. In response, we leaders in Jesuit institutions have the temptation to pitch faith and church and focus on often unanchored definitions of spirituality, Ignatian and otherwise. This avoidance runs two real risks. The Catholic intellectual tradition, the foundation of our higher education project, and of much progress in the world, is at risk from secularism and especially fundamentalism if we do not wrestle with the questions around faith. And as well, if our justice efforts are untethered to faith, they will fall into an endless circle of whose justice are we talking about? Let's return to our contemplation of place and the person for whom fear is the dominant response to a changing neighborhood. Decisions made in fear are generally not good ones because they cannot see the bigger picture. And when that fear gets generalized to anxiety, that is, becomes a reaction wholly inappropriate to the actual reality that the fear is based on, you are statistically more likely to march down the mall and break into the U.S. Capitol. But even if the person you composed didn't make the march, is she going to be swayed by our excellent programs on the environment, humanitarian action, and slaveholding? No, she is not. The only engagement that will make a difference is to go deeper through the door of faith, as she finds a way to embrace a living God's presence in her actual life. One could say that the person you imagined isn't the focus of our research or the better world that we want to form. But for most people in the world, faith is the door to understanding who they are, what they want, and what they do. Institutional and personal engagement with faith issues decreases the chance of arrogance and disdain for the people we study and whose lives we want to engage. An always moving part of my job as JRS International Director is listening to people's stories. Amid horrible journeys and inhuman abuse, refugees are grateful to God for having brought them this far. JRS succeeds because faith is the starting point for understanding who we are, who they are. I'm not saying that everyone in Jesuit schools needs to be a person of faith, much less a Catholic. But to stay true to our mission, and so that the more just world of God's reign actually comes into existence. Wrestling with the faith question is critical. a different paradigm. Mission and identity teams have a shared understanding of Ignatian spirituality. You know how to talk to bishops, to Jesuits, to other people of faith about your work. But the two isms arise at the edge of a living faith, and they require a different kind of preaching, the good news. Pope Francis' enormous efforts are based on humanity, not dogma, as the starting point for pastoral care and theological reflection. Our universities are on the periphery of the church, on the frontier of faith. I have found God in my Catholic faith and in the church. But for many of our colleagues and students, the Catholic Church is not a doorway, but a stumbling block to the gospel. The good news in this is that the Jesuits are a missionary community called to serve on the frontiers, and Ignatian spirituality, the underpinning of Jesuit education, is designed to do the same. Our university project began when Catholics were outsiders. We successfully set up a higher education system for immigrant and first-generation Catholics to succeed. For those who look to Rome for answers, there are other universities. But for those trying to figure out what faith means between the two isms, or those looking for a way to sustain a felt call for justice, we are the place. What might this look like? Kevin Quinn, S.J., the former president of Scranton University, just wrote a monograph for studies in Jesuit spirituality on the legacy of Ignacio Ellacuría, S.J., the martyred rector of the University of Central America in El Salvador, and how his vision may be viable in American Jesuit universities. In the monograph's introduction, Robert LaSalle Cline focuses on a 1969 retreat for Jesuits in Central America that provided the impetus for the UCA's transformation. In the fourth talk of the retreat, Miguel Elizondo captured the essence of Ignatius' experience at the River Cardener. I quote, "The Ignatian vocational experience consists of the Trinity present and operative in the world, in all things. Into this history of salvation comes the human par excellence, Christ, and with him all persons chosen to actively cooperate, to realize the salvific plan of God. And the world is the location for the encounter with God. Love is not primarily affective or contemplative, but a love realized in works, which translates into service, which is realized in this cooperation with God." End quote. Love expressed in deeds, translated into service, realized in cooperation with God. This is what it's all about. Who might be our model for this transition from the old ways to the frontier, to engaging and embracing the wisdom on the periphery? Let me propose the patron saint of missions, St. Francis Xavier. Now, the stories we've all heard recall mass baptisms and a very tired arm in India. We don't hear about Xavier's own conversion to work on the frontiers when he went to Japan in 1549. Through a painful process of letting presuppositions go and of appreciating the culture he found himself in, his 27 months in Japan were a conversion of his approach. His letters home shared his desire to start a university to engage the Ignatian vision with the Japanese reality. Sophia University in Tokyo proudly claims this in the story of its foundation. In 2021, the faith that does justice is missionary activity. How can we shape it? The universal apostolic preferences. In 2019, Father Arturo Sosa presented the Universal Apostolic Preferences, or UAP, as the contemporary expression of Jesuit mission. These four orientations deepen our personal, communal, and institutional conversion toward the faith that does justice. You can see them on the screen right now. I won't read every word. To show the way to God through the spiritual exercises and discernment, to walk with the poor, to accompany young people, to care for our common home. In the initial responses, institutions around the world proudly pointed to examples of the UAP in action, sometimes sounding like mission accomplished checklists or PR announcements. Later reflection and articulation further stressed what Pope Francis said in his approval of the UAP, written as a personal note in Spanish to Father Sosa. The Holy Father said, "The first preference is crucial because it presupposes as a basic condition of the Jesuits' relationship with the Lord a personal and communal life of prayer and discernment. I recommend that in your role as general you insist on this. Without your prayerful attitude, the rest will not work. A personal and communal life of prayer and discernment." The UAP is not a collection of activities for a midterm grade. It is a stance towards the world that informs what we do as Jesuit institutions, as lay and Jesuit partners in ministry, guiding those institutions. This is our current articulation of the Diaconia Fide of Father Kolvenbach, and it is the guidepost for our way of proceeding as Jesuit institutions. Now, I'm not an expert on mission and identity, but let me venture onto thin ice and make 3 suggestions for implementing Pope Francis's challenge of prayer and discernment in personal and communal life in your missionary context as 21st century Francis Saviors, using Ignatian spirituality to engage the faith. First, prayer. The examen is the prayer par excellence of Ignatian spirituality, accessible to everyone. Its outward structure exists everywhere, from mindfulness exercises to your daily Cortana reminder. Beginning this practice wherever people are can be the first step toward moving from an ism and toward actual encounter with God. Doing this opens us up to deeper encounters with the world and the Spirit within it. And in our Christian context, cooperating with Christ to realize the salvific plan of God. Now, many of you are already doing this, and maybe you've tried it with some limited success. Don't give up. I spent most of my Jesuit life struggling with the examen. It didn't work until I started doing it in the morning rather than the evening when I was tired and totally distracted. Stay with it. Keep at it. In the same way of staying with it, Xavier needed months to understand the Japanese culture. And when he did, he recognized its reflective quality as a nurturing soil for the Christian faith. Discernment. Discernment has become an Ignatian speak buzzword applied to everything from sponsorship to the color of the faculty dining room. Discernment and planning go together. Discernment is decision-making about the mission, where the perspectives of each person and the values of the institution are brought together to find the way forward, guided by the Spirit. There are numerous management processes that build on such a joining of values and experience. From appreciative inquiry, first developed at Case Western Reserve University, to the discerning leadership work being led by David McCallum, S.J., formerly of Lemoyne University. Can we find ways to listen to one another, to deliberately engage the values we share, to find room for the nascent faith questions that arise in the examen, and put them toward the common project, a more just world? While this communal dimension to Ignatian spirituality has been present since the beginning, its prominence and practice is new and taking shape. As Francis says in Fratelli Tutti, how important it is to dream together. By ourselves, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. This too became one of Xavier's insights in Japan. It wasn't enough to merely baptize. He needed to form lay leaders of new Christian communities. If you have seen the movie Silence, you know how determined and committed to the faith that lay leadership became. Discernment at the campus and university network level is necessary so that our efforts for justice are based on a living faith. Otherwise, each justice effort risks becoming an isolated event flowing through social media, supplanted by the next new thing, the next flavor of the month. Personal and communal life. This is where I say, age quod ages, do what you are doing. Every school has a center for engaging the faith values of Jesuit education in the public forum. This is incredibly beneficial to the believers who are among our faculty, staff, and students. These spaces also create the next step for those ready to move beyond mission territory into a deeper engagement with faith in its communal and even church dimensions. These centers are also the vehicles to dialogue with the non-missionary parts of the church, the leadership and the people in the pews, Catholic or not. Once again, Xavier is a model. He was not shy in his letters to Europe, describing the situations, calling for assistance, making clear of the importance of preaching his faith. We can do likewise. And if we do the work of faith, wherever we wind up in our own faith journey, we will have the humility and can offer the dignity of conversation with that frightened man living in a neighborhood that no longer looks the way he wanted it to be. Not long after his talk at Santa Clara, I asked Father Kolvenbach how many people it would take to make our campuses centers of the faith that does justice. In his discreetly evasive manner, he guessed about 30%. I think he was right for two reasons. In a 2018 article in Scientific American, Dr. David Noonan notes that 25% is the tipping point for the size of a group that can reshape thinking and opinions of the majority on critical topics. A focused minority committed to a particular perspective can lead the majority to a new way of looking at important realities. It is also true because life is a lot like baseball, and a 300 hitter has a future in the major leagues. We don't need everyone to engage the faith questions, and no one bats 1,000. But it is possible. Allow me to end with a quote from my favorite management guru, the late Max Dupree. He put it pithily: the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. You are leaders of our institutions, holding the responsibility for mission. It is your job to define our way of proceeding in this missionary moment. Develop a 30% that can articulate a missionary understanding of faith and justice on your campus, in your city. Discern how your university's mission goes forward, with or without Jesuits in any significant position, to continue to engage our society. And engage the role of Ignatian formation of school leadership, from insisting that the president and key personnel have an experience of the spiritual exercises, to offering students a dynamic experience of co-laboring with Christ, to making sure that we can listen to and welcome the women and men overwhelmed by change in their communities. I say these things to you because I say them to myself and to our teams in JRS. The service of faith is the driver of our promotion of justice in all Jesuit ministries. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you.